They told her she was special, that her blood was pure, that no one outside their walls could understand the gift carried in her veins. But what she couldn't know, what she didn't know, was that the very thing they praised in her was the sickness passed down for generations. She was 13 when they told her who she would marry. He was 15, and he was her brother. This isn't fiction. It isn't ancient history. It isn't some forgotten European monarchy. It's rural America, hidden in the hills down winding roads not marked on maps. Families that still practice what the rest of the world pretends never existed here. Not just inbreeding, but something far older. A belief system rooted in isolation, pride, and a God they made in their own image. For outsiders, it's easy to look away, to mock it, to dismiss it as the remnants of uneducated people trapped in poverty. But if you dare to look deeper, you'll find something worse. These families weren't just surviving. They were protecting something, preserving it. A custom so disturbing it was never meant to be seen by the outside world. She never questioned it. Why would she? Every adult she knew spoke in the same tongue. Every photograph in the house looked the same. Pale faces, distant eyes, names repeated across the generations like chants. There were no strangers, only kin, only blood. The town nearby never asked questions. They had learned long ago it was better not to. The stories were too old, too strange, and too close to home. Sometimes rumors surfaced of children with strange afflictions, of women disappearing after childbirth, of entire properties shuttered for years with no explanation. But the truth was never pursued. It was safer that way. But in 1997, one woman slipped through. Born into the family, raised in silence, groomed for her role, she ran. She would be the first to speak out, not to the police, not to the media, but to a small-town nurse who noticed the bruises didn't match the story. That nurse made a report, and buried in that report was a single sentence that still chills the spine. She said her husband was her brother and that this was her family's way. What happened next exposed a horrifying tradition still alive and still protected in parts of the country we drive past every day. The girl's name was withheld from public records for her safety, for her sanity. But her story filtered through legal channels like smoke slipping through cracks in an old house. Her birth certificate was real. Her marriage certificate was filed. Her family records were intact, too intact. It was the consistency that disturbed investigators most. Every name in that bloodline traced back to the same 5 surnames, repeated, interchanged, recycled. They lived in the foothills of eastern Tennessee in a cluster of houses not shown on GPS. No electricity, no phone lines, a private chapel at the center, painted white but long rotted at the baseboards. That's where the ceremonies were held. That's where the teachings were passed down. A book, not the Bible, but something else. Handwritten, leather-bound, passed down from patriarch to son. Its pages described a lineage that must never be tainted. A chosen line marked by God that had to remain sealed to outsiders. This wasn't just familial pride. This was doctrine, a theology of blood. The elders preached that purity came through suffering, that birth defects were not curses but signs of favor, that obedience to the family ensured survival in a world that had betrayed them long ago. And the children, they were born into it like cattle into a pen, marked, labeled, directed toward their fate. The woman who escaped told the nurse that she didn't understand what was wrong at first. Everyone else was doing it, she said. Her aunt had married her cousin. Her mother had married her half-brother. There was no such thing as a family tree, only a circle, a closed loop. She had never heard the word inbreeding until she was nearly 15. Whispered by an aide in a clinic, as if it were a curse word. When child services came, they found nothing. No drugs, no outright abuse, no one willing to talk. But what they couldn't see was the deeper truth. The manipulation was spiritual, psychological, generational. The children didn't cry. They didn't resist. They believed what they were told. That this was their duty. That love outside the bloodline was sin. And the girl, trembling in the corner of a dim clinic room, whispered, "They said I would ruin the blood if I left." That was the moment officials realized they weren't dealing with simple neglect. They were standing at the edge of something ancient, something ritualistic, a living echo of America's forgotten horrors. Authorities couldn't prove much, not without cooperation, and no one inside the family was talking. The girl was placed in protective custody under a false name, but her mind had already been shaped by the doctrine. She didn't know how to live outside the bloodline. She didn't trust strangers. She asked more than once if her brother was being punished, not for what he did to her, but for being denied her. That was love, she'd been told. That was faithfulness. That was tradition. Her story was quietly shelved, buried in sealed court records. But a single social worker couldn't let it go. She began investigating the family history, tracing land records, genealogy charts, even interviewing locals off the record. Of course, what she found wasn't just disturbing. It was methodical. This wasn't accidental inbreeding. It was engineered. The family had bought up surrounding properties over several decades. They discouraged marriage outside the circle, homeschooled their children, built fences, not physical ones, but social, spiritual, and generational. Every child born was logged in a family book. Their traits noted, their matches considered from the time they could walk. "She's a strong one. Might go to David's boy," one elder reportedly said, referring to a girl barely 5. Some of the boys were groomed to be patriarchs, quiet, devout, emotionally absent. Others were discarded, sent to work camps in neighboring counties under assumed identities, never spoken of again. The girls were different. They were raised like vessels, taught obedience, silence, scripture. Not the scripture you know, but one rewritten in their own dialect. One verse read, "Thy brother is thy mirror. In him, thy flesh shall be made full." Genetic counselors later called it a closed-loop reproduction system. In plain language, generation after generation of cousins, half-siblings, uncles, nieces, pairing, breeding, repeating. Some children were stillborn, some born with cognitive delays, some with deformities, but that was seen as the price of purity. They believed they were preserving something ancient, something the outside world had lost. The most chilling detail, the family had records of all of it. Meticulous journals written in cursive going back nearly 120 years. Names, pairings, birth outcomes, medical conditions, notes on temperament. They weren't hiding it. They believed in it, and they were proud. By the time this truth began to surface, it was already too late. The damage had been done, not just to bodies, but to minds, to souls. There was one name that kept appearing in the records. Sarah May. She wasn't the girl who escaped. She was someone older, a ghost in the lineage, mentioned again and again in the journals, always with reverence and fear. The entries dated back to the 1930s, some written in black ink, others in brown that looked more like dried blood. Phrases like "Sarah May's line must be preserved and the blessed womb shall not wander" appeared beside notations of births and pairings. Sarah May, as the social worker eventually pieced together, was the matriarch of this doctrine. Born in 1912, married at 13, gave birth to her first child at 14, her own half-brother's son. Over the course of her life, she bore 11 children, 5 of whom died before the age of 5. The rest were raised under her rule. But she wasn't passive. She wasn't brainwashed. She was the architect. According to an old neighbor, one of the last people to leave the area before the family bought up all the surrounding land. Sarah May believed she had been chosen by God during a vision in childbirth. She reportedly claimed that an angel had appeared, telling her that only her blood was clean enough to preserve the truth of Eden. Everyone else, she said, was contaminated by modern sin. She rewrote the Bible by hand, removed verses, added others, and most chilling of all, she had a punishment system for unfaithful blood. Girls who refused their assigned matches were locked in the root cellar for days, fed only bread and water, made to memorize scripture until their voices cracked. Boys who disobeyed were beaten not for violence but for looking beyond the property line. It's believed Sarah May died in 1983. But her rules didn't die with her. Her journal became scripture. Her bloodline sacred and her name unspoken in the family but still worshipped. The girl who escaped in 1997. She said as Sarah May's great-granddaughter, she had never heard her name aloud. But when she was shown a photograph during therapy, her voice trembled. That's the woman above the altar. They didn't hang a cross in the chapel. They hung her portrait. Sarah May wasn't just a matriarch. She was a prophet, a tyrant, a designer of generational control. And long after her death, her reach still shaped the minds, the wombs, and the marriages of children not yet born. By now, you might be wondering, how does something like this survive? How does it remain hidden in modern America with its cameras, clinics, and child welfare systems? The answer isn't lack of law. It's the silence of culture. These families don't trust outsiders. And more importantly, outsiders don't want to know. Law enforcement agencies quietly admit that deep rural cases often go unresolved for reasons of jurisdiction, staffing, or simply danger. Social workers are warned not to push too far in communities like these, not for fear of legal trouble, but because those who ask too many questions tend to get answers that unravel them. In 2001, a local pastor who tried to intervene in that same county vanished after giving a sermon about the blood of the lamb being twisted by man. His car was found a week later, parked on the shoulder of a mountain road, keys still in the ignition, no body, no follow-up. His congregation never spoke of him again. And here's where the horror sharpens into something almost spiritual. Outsiders don't just fear these families. Some admire them. Off-grid groups, anti-government sections. There are whispers, always whispers, that this kind of generational blood purity is viewed by certain fringe circles as a kind of strength, a return to old ways, to the land before corruption. There's a reason these families aren't caught. It's because they aren't entirely alone. They are protected not by any official order, but by the unspoken pacts of rural life. You don't ask what happens on someone else's land. You don't knock if there's no mailbox. And if a family buries their own dead behind their house, you simply look the other way. One neighbor, when asked why no one ever reported the strange rituals, simply said, "That's their way. Always been." So when the girl escaped, when she whispered her story to the nurse, and that nurse whispered it to the county, she wasn't just breaking family code. She was shattering a system built over a century of quiet complicity. And yet the family still lives on, still in the same area, still raising children, still pairing names in journals. The girl's escape didn't burn the house down. It just let in a crack of light. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments. What would you have done if this was your bloodline? Years passed. The girl, now a woman, never returned. But the land did not forget her. A strange thing began happening in the years after her escape. Fires, small ones at first, a shed, a barn. Then one winter, the chapel itself. Locals claimed it was lightning, though the sky had been clear. Others believed someone had come back, not to reclaim, but to destroy, to sever what couldn't be unknot. But even in ashes, belief can survive. The family rebuilt, not the same way, smaller, quieter, more guarded than before. They stopped filing births at the county courthouse, stopped allowing any of the children to attend even the local clinic. They vanished deeper into the woods. No phones, no cars, just long gravel roads, motion-activated cameras, and signs that read, "Private trespassers will not be warned again." Yet, one record did leak out. In 2009, a midwife who had briefly worked with a satellite clinic just beyond the county lines reported a home birth that left her shaken. The infant had no external ears. His limbs were malformed, but the parents, a couple in their late teens, appeared unfazed. The boy, barely 20, referred to the baby as the next in Sarah's circle. The girl, his wife, had a distant stare. She never spoke a word. The midwife was told never to return. She didn't. The journal entries from the earlier investigation, those seized and copied by the social worker before she retired, included chilling plans, predicted pairing stretching into the 2030s. Children who had not yet been conceived were already promised based on temperament, facial symmetry, blood like cattle breeding, except the cattle believed they were divine. This isn't just about genetics. It's about control, about belief systems so deeply embedded that reality becomes irrelevant. These children grow up thinking the outside world is dangerous, that schools will poison theirs, and that doctors will sterilize them. That the only safe hands are those of their own kin, even if those hands harm them. And somewhere deep in those hills, a new girl is being told the same words. You are chosen. You are pure. Your blood must never mix with the world. She doesn't know it yet, but her husband has already been chosen. He lives 3 doors down and he is her brother. Maybe you want to believe this ended. That the girl who escaped sparked some reckoning, some investigation that finally tore the rot from the roots. But that's not how these stories close. Not in America. Not in places the census skips and the mail trucks avoid. What survives in the dark does so because it knows how to hide in plain sight, wrapped in flags, in faith, in family. Today, the last known trace of that bloodline is a weather-beaten sign at the edge of a dirt road. No name, just a painted symbol, a circle wrapped by a line. It's not on any map. No street signs lead to it, but those who grew up nearby know what it means. Keep out. When state officials attempted to reinvestigate in 2012, they were met with silence. No children visible, no clear signs of occupancy, and yet fresh laundry on lines, smoke from chimneys. One agent swore he saw a child watching from the woods, pale face, blank eyes, holding something close to her chest like a doll or a book. She vanished the moment she was seen. What scares people most isn't the deformities. It isn't the inbreeding. It's the faith. The belief that this is not only acceptable but necessary. That blood isn't just biology. It's doctrine. That love outside the family is heresy. That to break the chain is to die alone and damned. And if you listen, really listen, you'll find echoes of this belief far beyond that Tennessee hillside. In secluded communities, in fringe cults, in online forums that speak of genetic purity with chilling devotion, it's the same seed, same sickness, passed from hand to hand under the guise of tradition. The girl, the first to flee, never gave interviews. She changed her name, started over. But in her journal, uncovered years later by a trauma counselor, she wrote one final entry. I still dream of the chapel, of the portrait watching, of the voice that told me to obey. Sometimes I wonder if I left or if I just became the first exile of a kingdom that will never stop building walls. This is not a story of the past. It's a living wound. And somewhere out there, the next ceremony is being prepared. A girl is being dressed in white and her brother waits at the altar.